In the long, brutal, and blood-soaked history of human conflict, the metrics of victory have almost always been stark and simple. Victory is measured in tons of steel, the thunder of firepower, the grim arithmetic of attrition, and the sheer number of soldiers you can throw at your enemy until they break. But in the final, desperate year of the Second World War, as the Allied war machine ground its way across a shattered Europe, a secret weapon unlike any other was unleashed upon the Third Reich. It was an army that waged war not with bullets, but with belief. It fought not with cannons, but with creativity. Its soldiers were not just infantrymen trained to kill. They were a hand-picked collection of artists, actors, architects, and sound engineers, men whose talents were better suited to a Broadway stage than a battlefield. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so clandestine, so profoundly strange, that for more than 50 years after the guns fell silent, the world had absolutely no idea it even existed. Their mission and their methods were buried under layers of classification, a ghost story whispered only by the men who had lived it. They were known, appropriately, as the Ghost Army. Their singular, audacious purpose? To fool the entire German military machine, from the frontline soldier in his foxhole to the highest echelons of the Wehrmacht High Command. They would do it using an arsenal of inflatable tanks, fleets of powerful speakers, phony radio signals, and a boundless well of pure, unadulterated imagination. This is the incredible, almost unbelievable true story of how 1,100 men became the world's greatest masters of illusion, wielding creativity as their ultimate weapon and saving tens of thousands of lives by orchestrating the single greatest magic trick in the history of modern warfare. Imagine for a moment. It is 1944. You are a German soldier, cold and weary, peering out from the relative safety of an observation post nestled in the rolling hills of occupied France. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and fear. Through your field binoculars, you see it. The low, menacing silhouette of an American M4 Sherman tank, its cannon pointed like a steel finger toward your lines as it grinds into position. Then, emerging from the woods behind it, another appears. And another. Soon, a whole armored column is massing right in front of you, a terrifying display of American industrial might. You scribble frantic notes to your commander. An attack is imminent. But here's what you don't know. The 35-ton tank you are so intently watching is a phantom. It is a carefully stitched bag of vulcanized rubber that weighs only 93 pounds and can be deflated and packed away by 4 men. You don't know that the deafening roar of its powerful engine, the metallic clatter of its treads churning mud, and the shouted, urgent commands of its crew are all an elaborate audio recording. This sound is blasting from a massive, 500-pound speaker hidden deep in the woods, part of a sonic system so powerful its manufactured reality can be heard up to 15 miles away. And that grizzled American general you saw earlier in the village cafe, the one with the eagles on his collar, drunkenly and loudly boasting about the coming attack to his aides? He is, in fact, a corporal from New Jersey, an actor following a carefully rehearsed script, performing for an audience of local informants he knows are listening. You are not witnessing an army preparing for battle. You are witnessing a performance. You are the unwitting audience for a traveling roadshow of war, and you, the mighty German army, are its primary and only target. By the summer of 1944, the tide of the Second World War had decisively turned against the Axis powers, yet the final outcome was far from a foregone conclusion. The monumental success of the D-Day landings on June 6 had kicked open the door to Fortress Europe, a stunning feat of logistics and courage. But pushing through that door and into the heart of Germany was proving to be a bloody, arduous, and soul-crushing slog. The Allied forces that poured onto the continent discovered a German army that was cornered, but far from broken. They were battle-hardened, deeply entrenched in defensive positions they had held for years, and fighting with the ferocious desperation of an army defending its homeland. Every mile gained, every French village liberated, came at a horrific cost in blood and treasure. The hedgerows of Normandy became a meat grinder, where progress was measured in yards, not miles, and casualties mounted at an alarming rate. Allied commanders like Dwight D. Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, and the famously aggressive George S. Patton were locked in a deadly, high-stakes chess match with the German high command. They quickly realized that overwhelming force alone would not be enough to break the stalemate and hasten the end of the war. They needed more than just tanks and bombs. They needed a psychological edge. They needed a way to outthink, outmaneuver, and utterly confuse their enemy on a strategic level. The challenge was immense and multifaceted. How do you convince the Germans to mass their elite panzer divisions to the left when your real, decisive punch is coming from the right? How do you make your front line appear strong and continuous when in reality, rapid advances have stretched it dangerously thin, leaving vulnerable gaps? How do you convince the enemy you're overwhelmingly strong where you're actually weak, and dangerously weak where you are, in fact, massing for the kill? The answer, they concluded, lay not in the factories of Detroit, but in the shadowy and sophisticated art of tactical military deception. This wasn't an entirely new concept. The British, in particular, had become masters of misdirection and had demonstrated its extraordinary effectiveness. During the pivotal North African campaign in 1942, their Operation Bertram became a landmark in military history. To mislead the brilliant German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel about the timing and location of the British 8th Army's offensive at the Second Battle of El Alamein, they constructed thousands of dummy vehicles. They built fake supply dumps, ran phony pipelines, and used masterful camouflage to hide their real armor while displaying a phantom army elsewhere. The deception was a stunning success, contributing directly to a decisive Allied victory that turned the tide in North Africa. American military planners took careful, detailed notes. Visionary officers like Colonel Billy Harris and Major Ralph Ingersoll, a man who had been a celebrity journalist and publisher for Time and the New Yorker before the war, were utterly convinced that the United States needed its own dedicated deception unit. They didn't just want to copy the British, they envisioned something bolder. They pictured a fully self-contained, highly mobile, multimedia deception force, the first of its kind in U.S. Army history. This unit would be a veritable Swiss Army knife of illusion, able to go anywhere on the front, impersonate any Allied unit, and create battlefield illusions on a scale the world had never seen before. The idea was radical, almost heretical, within the rigid, hierarchical structure of the U.S. Army. In an institution built on overwhelming firepower and meticulously drilled formations, they were proposing a unit built on creativity, improvisation, and misdirection. They argued that they needed soldiers who could not only follow orders without question but also act, design, and innovate under the extreme pressures of combat. Their primary job wouldn't be to destroy the enemy with bullets, but to deceive them, to play on their intelligence, their fears, and their baked-in assumptions, luring them into making fatal strategic mistakes. The stakes were astronomical. A single failed deception, one discovered inflatable tank or a poorly acted scene, could not only get their own small, lightly armed unit completely annihilated, but could also fatally expose the real position and intentions of nearby Allied forces, leading to catastrophic, large-scale losses. But if they succeeded, they could save tens of thousands of lives, both Allied and civilian, and potentially shorten the war. The plan was audacious, risky, and brilliant. It was approved. On January 20th, 1944, at Camp Forest, Tennessee, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was officially activated. The Ghost Army was about to be born. The creation of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops triggered a recruitment drive unlike any other in the long history of the United States military. The unit's forward-thinking founders, Harris and Ingersoll, weren't combing the country for the strongest, the bravest, or the deadliest soldiers. They were hunting for something much rarer, a quality not typically valued in the ranks of an army at war. They needed artists. They were in search of men whose minds were wired differently, men who saw the world not merely as it was, but as it could be perceived by an enemy looking for clues. The official call for recruits went out not to the farms of the Midwest or the factories of the Rust Belt, but to the bustling art schools, avant-garde design studios, and high-pressure advertising agencies of New York City and Philadelphia. Recruiters, men more accustomed to judging a soldier's physique, were now tasked with judging portfolios. They scoured the hallowed halls of institutions like the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, the Cooper Union in Manhattan, and the Rhode Island School of Design, hunting for top-tier painters, imaginative illustrators, visionary architects, theatrical set designers, innovative sound engineers, and even charismatic actors. The result of this bizarre talent search was a motley and eclectic crew, the likes of which the U.S. Army had never seen before and likely never will again. It was a unit of creatives, thinkers, and performers suddenly clad in olive drab. One of the early recruits was a young man named Bill Blass, a fellow with a keen and sophisticated eye for design who, after the war, would leverage his talent to become a world-renowned fashion icon, dressing first ladies and movie stars. Another was a quiet, contemplative painter named Ellsworth Kelly, whose unique abstract perspective on shape and form would later make him a celebrated pioneer of minimalist and color field painting. There was Arthur Singer, a man with a passion for the natural world, who would go on to become one of America's most celebrated painters of birds. And there was Art Kane, a budding creative who would later become a legendary fashion and music photographer, responsible for some of the most iconic images of the 20th century. These were emphatically not your typical GS. One veteran of the unit later recalled that the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was rumored to have one of the highest collective IQs in the entire U.S. Army, with an average score of 119. These were men who were not just permitted, but actively encouraged to use their brains, their wit, and their artistic talent as weapons of war. They were the ultimate thinking man's soldiers. Their training was a surreal, almost comical, mix of standard military discipline and a hyper-creative art class. At Army camps in Tennessee and Pine Camp, New York, they dutifully learned the basics of soldiering. They marched for miles in full gear, learned to handle their very limited defensive weapons. They had little more than .50 caliber machine guns to protect themselves, and were taught how to dig a proper foxhole, a skill that would save their lives on more than one occasion. But in the same week, they would spend hours learning the fine art of tactical deception. They studied German military insignia, vehicle markings, and unit structures until they could replicate them perfectly from memory. They ran endless experiments in what they dubbed imperfect camouflage, a counterintuitive technique designed not to hide things completely, but to make fake objects look real by ensuring they were just visible enough for enemy reconnaissance to spot and misidentify. They learned how to use shadows, spacing, and dummy tracks to make two lone trucks look like an entire motorized convoy on the move. It was a walking, talking paradox, an army unit that prized imagination over infantry tactics, where a sketchbook was as vital as a K-ration. While other soldiers across the army were meticulously cleaning their rifles and running bayonet drills, the men of the Ghost Army were sketching enemy uniforms, painting phony vehicle markings, and holding brainstorming sessions on how to better simulate the sound of a pontoon bridge being built at night. They even documented their own journey across the battlefields of Europe in countless watercolors and drawings, creating a uniquely personal, beautiful, and artistic record of the war from a perspective no one else had. This bizarre assembly of creatives was ultimately organized into 4 distinct but interconnected parts, each a crucial piece of the overall illusion. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers, the largest component, handled the visual magic, the inflatable tanks, and all the stagecraft that went with them. The Signal Company Special was tasked with radio trickery, impersonating other units on the airwaves. The 3132nd Signal Service Company Special was in charge of the sonic deception, the battlefield sound effects. And providing security and muscle for this entire theatrical production was the 406th Combat Engineers, who also helped create the physical environment for the illusions, like digging fake emplacements. Together, they formed a symphony of illusion, a traveling roadshow of war, ready to take its strange and brilliant performance to the front lines of Europe. They were, in essence, con artists, and their mark was the entire German army. The Ghost Army's formidable power didn't come from the destructive force of gunpowder. It came from a meticulously crafted, multi-sensory deception designed to manipulate the enemy's perception of reality. They waged war on the minds of German commanders, systematically exploiting their intelligence-gathering methods with a 4-pronged attack of sight, sound, radio, and pure, unadulterated theater. Each element was designed to corroborate the others, creating a lie so detailed and consistent that it became more believable than the truth. The most iconic and visually striking tool in the Ghost Army's arsenal was its vast collection of inflatable decoys. The men of the 603rd Camouflage Engineers were the visual artists of this phantom force, modern-day magicians equipped with hundreds of life-sized, inflatable replicas of Sherman tanks, M10 tank destroyers, 155mm artillery pieces, jeeps, trucks, and even airplanes. These were not the crude party balloons one might imagine. They were sophisticated fakes, constructed with heavy-duty rubber and intricate internal baffling by major American rubber companies like Goodyear and U.S. Rubber. Inflated on the front lines by powerful, gasoline-powered air compressors, a rubber dummy of a 35-ton Sherman tank could be brought from a flat duffel bag to a full-sized, three-dimensional life in a matter of minutes. When fully inflated, it weighed just 93 pounds, light enough to be repositioned by 4 men. Yet from the air or from an observation post a few hundred yards away, it was virtually indistinguishable from the real steel thing. But the true genius of the visual deception was in the staging. The soldiers knew that a neat row of perfectly parked, pristine tanks would immediately look fake to a trained observer. So they dedicated themselves to creating an illusion of authentic activity and military sloppiness. The men of the 406th Combat Engineers would use their bulldozers and other heavy equipment to carve fake tank tracks into the roads and fields, creating the visual impression of a massive armored column constantly on the move. They meticulously simulated the wear and tear of a real encampment. They even went so far as to string up laundry lines between their fake tanks and real trucks, because every soldier, German or American, knows that an army has to do its laundry. It was this obsessive, almost fanatical attention to detail that sold the lie. They deliberately placed their fakes under what they called imperfect camouflage, draping nets carelessly or leaving a corner of a tank exposed, ensuring that German reconnaissance planes flying high overhead would spot them, photograph them, and report back to their commanders exactly the phantom story the Ghost Army wanted them to see. An army is never silent, and the 3,132nd Signal Service Company were the dedicated conductors of this phantom orchestra. Their primary instrument was a set of massive, 500-pound speakers mounted on the back of armored half-tracks. Their ammunition wasn't shells, but a comprehensive library of sound effects, meticulously recorded on state-of-the-art wire recorders, a predecessor to magnetic tape, at Fort Knox, Kentucky. This wasn't just a random collection of noise. It was a carefully curated and cataloged collection of every sound a large military unit makes. There were recordings of armored divisions on the move, the distinct clatter of Sherman tanks versus light tanks, the sounds of engineers constructing pontoon bridges under pressure, the shouts of officers, and even the unique acoustic signatures of different types of American and German artillery. Under the concealing cloak of darkness, these sonic trucks would creep to within a few hundred yards of the front lines, a terrifyingly dangerous proposition. The sound engineers, braving potential mortar and machine gun fire, would then unleash a torrent of sound, expertly mixed and amplified, powerful enough to be heard clearly up to 15 miles away. A German soldier shivering in his foxhole would suddenly hear the unmistakable rumble of hundreds of tanks massing just over the next ridge. He would hear the sounds of men digging in, of trucks arriving with supplies, of a full division preparing for a dawn assault. It was psychologically devastating, and it was utterly convincing, forcing German commanders to shift troops, redirect artillery, and burn valuable fuel to react to threats that existed only as sound waves vibrating in the night air. While the other teams deceived the eyes and ears of soldiers on the front line, the signal company special targeted the more analytical minds of the German intelligence officers who were constantly monitoring the Allied airwaves. In World War II, every real American division had a unique radio network with its own specific call signs and messaging formats. And just as importantly, every individual radio operator had a unique fist, a distinctive, personal style of sending Morse code, with subtle variations in rhythm and spacing, as unique as a signature. The Ghost Army's radio operators were masters of both vocal and electrical impersonation. When a real Allied division was secretly pulled out of the line to be redeployed elsewhere, the Ghost Army's radio team would move into its old position. They would then meticulously mimic the departed unit's radio traffic, perfectly replicating their call signs, message formats, and even the individual sending fists of the operators they were replacing. To the German radio intercept stations listening in, it looked and sounded as if the division had never left its position. This created phantom armies on German strategic maps, pinning down enemy divisions to counter a threat that wasn't there, and allowing the real Allied units to move undetected toward their true objectives. The final layer of this elaborate deception was pure, unadulterated theater, designed to fool the lowest tech intelligence source of all, the human spy. The Ghost Army knew that spies, collaborators, and informants lurked in every French town and village behind the lines. So they gave them a show. Men from the unit, chosen for their acting ability, would don the uniforms and insignia of high-ranking officers, majors, colonels, even generals. They would then roll into local cafes and bars in a convoy of official-looking jeeps and proceed to have loud, seemingly casual conversations about fake plans, troop movements, and imminent attacks, knowing their every word was being eagerly absorbed and would be reported back to German intelligence within hours. They drove trucks with the stencil markings of other, real divisions through towns in their operational area. They sewed the fake shoulder patches of the divisions they were impersonating onto their own uniforms to complete the illusion for anyone who might see them. This atmospheric deception turned the entire area of operations into a giant, immersive stage. It was the final, crucial element that ensured that every German intelligence source, from high-tech spy planes to sophisticated radio intercepts to the local bartender, was being fed the exact same, carefully constructed and perfectly corroborating lie. They didn't just create a fake army, they created an entire, believable, false reality. The Ghost Army arrived in England in May 1944, just in time to prepare for the invasion of Europe, and first saw action just a few weeks after the D-Day landings, where they set up dummy artillery positions to draw German fire away from real units. But their full-scale, multifaceted debut as the traveling roadshow of war came later that summer. Over the next 10 grueling months, they mounted more than 20 distinct deception campaigns, a whirlwind tour of the European theater that took them from the treacherous hedgerows of Normandy, through the brutal winter battles in Luxembourg and Belgium, and ultimately to the banks of the Rhine River, the very doorstep of Germany. In the summer of 1944, as part of Operation Brittany, the Ghost Army used their burgeoning arsenal of illusions to support General George S. Patton's fast-moving Third Army as it raced across France. By creating phantom armored columns and fake infantry buildups, they helped tie down German defenders, allowing Patton's real forces to bypass strongpoints and maintain their astonishing momentum. During the difficult siege of the port city of Brest, they deployed their dummy tanks and blasted sound effects just yards from the heavily fortified front lines, their first major test under direct enemy fire, proving their mettle and their methods. Their true trial by fire, however, came in September 1944 during Operation Bettembourg in Luxembourg. Patton's rapid advance, while successful, had created a dangerously thin and overstretched front line near the German border. A critical 7-mile gap had opened up, which was far too long to be held by the available reserve troops. The Ghost Army, all 1,100 of them, was called in to hold this vulnerable stretch that would normally require a full division of around 14,000 soldiers. For over a week, they were the front line. They were the only American presence between the German army and Patton's exposed flank. They worked tirelessly, setting up vast fields of rubber tanks, creating fake command posts, and driving their lone squadron of real tanks in circles to create the impression of constant patrols. The ruse worked so spectacularly well that they repeatedly drew heavy German artillery fire onto their empty, inflatable positions, the shells tearing harmlessly through rubber and air. It was a nerve-wracking, terrifying assignment where discovery meant annihilation, but they held the line, protecting Patton's flank and proving that their strange brand of warfare could succeed even under the most intense pressure. Throughout the brutal autumn and winter of 1944, as the weather turned cold and the fighting grew more desperate, the Ghost Army was constantly on the move, a phantom force flitting from one crisis point to another. They played a key, if secret, role in the horrific Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, one of the deadliest single battles for U.S. forces in the entire war. Amidst the nightmarish landscape of shattered trees and constant shelling, their deceptions tied up German units that could have reinforced the line elsewhere, creating precious openings for exhausted American divisions to exploit. They were also active during the desperate days of the Battle of the Bulge, the massive German winter counteroffensive. As Patton famously raced his Third Army north to relieve the besieged 101st Airborne at Bastogne, the Ghost Army's radio tricksters were hard at work, using spoof radio traffic to help fool the Germans about the direction and speed of Patton's movements. General Patton, a man known for his aggressive, no-nonsense style, became one of their biggest and most important fans. According to Ghost Army historian Rick Bayer, Patton totally embraced their ideas and, far from seeing them as a sideshow, often personally offered suggestions to improve the realism of their illusions. In March 1945, with the German army in full retreat, the Ghost Army undertook its largest, most complex, and most important mission, Operation Viersen. The Allied Ninth Army was preparing to cross the mighty Rhine River, the last great natural barrier standing between them and the industrial heartland of Germany. A contested river crossing is one of the most dangerous and costly of all military maneuvers, and Allied command expected it to be a bloodbath. The Ghost Army's job was to make sure that didn't happen. Their mission was to impersonate two entire infantry divisions, the 30th and the 79th, a combined force of over 30,000 men. They were to stage a massive, phantom buildup about 10 miles south of the real crossing point near the town of Viersen. The goal was to attract the attention of the German High Command and draw elite German divisions away from the Ninth Army's actual target. The Ghost Army threw every single trick in their book into this grand performance. For days on end, they ran phony truck convoys and loops to create the illusion of a massive logistical buildup. They deployed over 600 inflatable tanks and artillery pieces in meticulously staged formations across the countryside. The radio team created a huge, crackling web of fake traffic, simulating the communications of two full divisions preparing an attack. The sonic team blasted a nonstop symphony of war around the clock, the sound of endless convoys arriving by night, and the clamor of engineering units building bridges and boats by day. They even set off flash canisters along the riverbank to simulate the muzzle flashes of a nighttime artillery barrage, which the Germans dutifully answered with real artillery, pounding empty fields and shredding the Ghost Army's rubber tanks with shrapnel. The deception was an unqualified, spectacular success. German intelligence, receiving corroborating reports from their spies, their radio intercepts, and their aerial reconnaissance, took the bait completely. They moved two of their best divisions, including a formidable panzer division, to face the Phantom Army at Viersen. On the night of March 24, 1945, the real Ninth Army crossed the Rhine to the north against only light and disorganized resistance. The crossing that was expected to cost thousands of American lives resulted in astonishingly few casualties. Some after-action reports suggest as few as 31 were killed in the initial assault. General William Simpson, commander of the Ninth Army, later formally commended the unit for their careful planning, minute attention to detail, and diligent execution. Military analysts, looking back at the German troop strengths and the typical casualty rates for such an operation, estimate that by drawing those German divisions away, the Ghost Army saved between 15,000 and 30,000 Allied lives. It was their masterpiece, the stunning culmination of a year of waging war with their minds. Just a few weeks after their crowning triumph at the Rhine River, the war in Europe came to an end. The soldiers of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops celebrated alongside millions of others across the continent. In July 1945, with their job done, the unit was officially disbanded and its members were sent home. But before they left, they were given one final, unequivocal order: absolute secrecy. Their exploits, their innovative tactics, their very existence were to be classified top secret. In the dawning chill of the Cold War, the U.S. Army had no intention of revealing its most innovative deception techniques to new and potential adversaries like the Soviet Union. The incredible story of the Ghost Army was locked away in classified government archives, and the men who were part of it were sworn to a lifetime of silence. This enforced secrecy came at a great and lasting personal cost. For over 50 years, these men couldn't speak about what they had truly done during the war. They couldn't share their proudest moments, their most terrifying experiences, or the true nature of their contribution to the Allied victory. To their families, their wives, their children, and their friends, they were just soldiers who had served in a strange, non-combat support unit with a vague and confusing name. They returned to civilian life carrying a secret history inside them. Veteran Bernie Bluestein, who had used his artistic skills to help create the visual deceptions, recalled that for half a century, all he could ever tell his family was that he did camouflage. Gilbert Seltzer, another veteran from the unit, remembered his family only knew that his job was to blow up tanks, a confusing and partial truth that he could never clarify by explaining they were inflatable. They went on with their lives, building careers and raising families. Bill Blass used his eye for aesthetics to build a fashion empire. Ellsworth Kelly channeled his wartime study of form and shadow into a career as a celebrated artist. But a core part of their life story, arguably the most extraordinary and defining part, remained a secret they were honor-bound to keep. They were unsung heroes, not by accident or by oversight, but by official government decree. In a final, ironic twist, the greatest trick the Ghost Army ever pulled wasn't fooling the German army. It was vanishing completely from the pages of history for more than half a century. The silence was finally, officially broken in 1996, when their remarkable mission was at long last declassified by the US government. When the classified files were finally opened to the public in 1996, it was as if a ghost that had haunted the archives of military history for 50 years had finally been given a voice. The story that emerged from the yellowed pages was so fantastic, so cinematic, that many historians and members of the public found it hard to believe. It fell to a small group of dedicated people, most notably filmmaker and author Rick Bayer, to bring the Ghost Army out of the shadows and into the light. Through his meticulously researched 2013 PBS documentary, The Ghost Army, and his subsequent book, Bayer, along with the families of the veterans, began a long and arduous campaign to gain official recognition for the soldiers who had been denied it for so long. The effort was a marathon, not a sprint, spanning nearly a decade of lobbying, letter writing, and raising public awareness. Finally, on February 1st, 2022, their persistence paid off. President Joe Biden signed the Ghost Army Congressional Gold Medal Act into law. The Congressional Gold Medal is the highest honor that the United States Congress can bestow upon a civilian or group. The official presentation ceremony was held on March 21st, 2024, at the U.S. Capitol, a place of honor for a story long kept in darkness. 80 years after they landed in France to begin their strange mission, the men of the Ghost Army were formally and publicly honored for their service. By the time of the ceremony, only 7 veterans of the unit were known to still be alive. 3 of them, all around 100 years old, were able to attend in person: Bernard Bluestein, John Christman, and Seymour Nussenbaum. Surrounded by their proud families, members of Congress, and the highest-ranking leaders of the U.S. military, they finally received their long-overdue public tribute. Secretary of the Army Christine Wormuth, speaking at the ceremony, noted that the innovative and creative spirit of the Ghost Army lives on in the modern military. Even though technology has changed quite a bit since 1944, she said, our modern techniques for information and influence operations build on a lot of what the Ghost Army did, and we are still learning from your legacy. For the veterans themselves, it was a moment of profound and emotional validation. Bernie Bluestein, the artist who could only say he did camouflage, reflected on the honor with humble pride. This represents my service, he said. I took it for granted for a long time and didn't realize the impact it had until now. If you found this story of ingenuity, creativity, and courage in the face of impossible odds as incredible as we did, make sure to subscribe to Chronicles of Old Tales and hit that notification bell for more hidden histories and forgotten tales. The story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops is far more than just a fascinating footnote in the sprawling history of World War II. It is a powerful and enduring testament to the boundless potential of human creativity, even in the darkest and most violent of times. The men of the Ghost Army proved a radical theory, that a well-crafted illusion could be more effective than a division of infantry, that a sound wave could be as powerful as an artillery shell, and that a carefully constructed lie could save thousands upon thousands of real lives. These 1,100 artists, actors, and engineers weren't just soldiers in the traditional sense. They were performance artists waging psychological war on a continental scale, with Europe as their stage. Their legacy is a vital reminder that sometimes the most potent weapon isn't the one that causes the most destruction, but the one that sparks the most profound and consequential deception. They were the phantoms of the front lines, the con artists of the combat zone, the one and only ghost army that tricked Hitler and then vanished from sight. Their incredible story remaining, for 50 years, their final, best-kept secret.